Welcome to Mercer Moments in American History. Today's program is called Voter Fraud, 1876. Now, I hope you know 1876 was the 100-year anniversary of what country? The United States of America. I know some professors are pushing a different date. They're lying to you. Our birth certificate says there was no United States until July 4th, 1776. For 1876, that election for president was our 100-year anniversary. It is an incredible time for African Americans. The Civil War had been fought. The 13th Amendment had abolished slavery. The 14th guaranteed civil rights to all African American citizens. It reversed the horrendous Dred Scott decision given by the Democrat majority of the Supreme Court in 1857. And then President Ulysis S. He came into office in 1868, and he asked African American men to have the right to vote. The 14th Amendment. It was an incredible time for African American citizens in terms of rights and freedoms. Unfortunately, there was voter fraud in 1876. And voter fraud was called voter intimidation, voter suppression. But intimidation and suppression was not defined as voter ID or picture ID to vote. No, intimidation and suppression was violence against African American families and voters, sometimes often sexual torture, lynching, murder of African American men and their families. Why? Because in 1876, the fact was that Democrats knew that African American men, these new voters, voted almost 100% Republican. For some reason, that's been erased, deleted from our history books. My name is Ken Mercer. I'm known as the Minister of Education. Why? Because I've been a champion as an elected official fighting for the rights of moms and dads to see what's being taught in our classrooms to your precious sons and daughters. I believe it's time for a parents' Bill of Rights education. I also believe in true and accurate American history. I've been worried where I see people rewrite or revise American history, and now I'm finding out they're just plain deleting. That's right, where there's major moments in American history that had been deleted from our textbooks, from our curriculum. Well, I'm working to bring those back. Always begin a session by first asking you to please hit the like button or subscribe button, whether it be a podcast or YouTube video. It's the only way we have of telling our sponsors that Mercer Moments in American History is making a difference. And secondly, I always give a shout out to one school. Today it's to the high school and college students of the state of Colorado. Those young men and women who love America. I know today, especially in our colleges, there's an agenda that is very anti-America. It's pro-socialist and anti-free market, free enterprise. Well, God bless those young men and women who are still fighting for American values. Now, in today's politically charged environment, you've seen it on TV, now more than ever, those young men and women who love America, they need our encouragement. They need our prayers. Voter fraud, 1876. Well, let's begin with a quick level set. I've shared before other programs, but today again, the year was 1854. A brand new political party formed. It was called the Republican Party, replacing what was called the Whig, W-H-I-G party. What happened, there was a movement throughout America. The media and historians call it the abolitionist movement. What it really was is called the Great Awakening. Christians were saying human slavery is a sin, and we must confront that sin. And that movement came through America. It came to England and Europe. I'll have a program next year on William Wilberforce. You'll hear about that. But it was major. Again, Christians who were saying that slavery is a sin, and their biggest opposition were other so-called Christians who were saying, are you ready for this? Who said that slavery was part of God's plan. Those are Christians on the pro-slavery Democrat side of our country. And the Great Awakening, they wanted to stop the expansion of slavery, where they believed that human slavery was a sin, and we must confront that sin. Wow, that's pretty bold in 1854. Well, the first major election was in 56. They lost that. But in 1857, the Democrat-controlled Supreme Court, whose members were either slaveholders or former slaveholders, they acted on what I call the worst Supreme Court decision ever, the Dred Scott decision, where they said that African Americans had no rights, no civil rights. It didn't matter if you're born slave, became free, if you're African American and born free. You had no civil rights. Again, probably the worst, what I call SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States decision ever. But in 1860, this new party, this new Republican Party, elected their first president. And you know his name, Abraham Lincoln. I'm just giving you a quick level set to what was happened to 1876. Of course, 1876 was a decade after the Civil War, a decade after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by a Democrat, pro-slavery Democrat named John Wilkes Booth. It'd been 10 years since then. But 1876 was an election. And again, this election was marred with massive voter fraud, voter intimidation. Democrats had lost a lot. Black Republicans had made incredible gains. I have a section next year I'll do about the first members of the U.S. Senate and U.S. House who were African American. I know my own state of Texas, the Republican Party of Texas was founded by an African American majority. You don't hear those things in history. But that's how powerful it was in the political clout of the African American males. Back then, only males could vote. But again, they voted overwhelmingly 100% Republican. Why? Because Republicans passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, the 14th Amendment to give civil rights to all African Americans, and the 15th Amendment, which granted suffrage the right to vote for African American males. However, on this election of 1876, the Democrat candidate and the Republican candidate, almost came to blows. Well, it did become physical blows because there was so much corruption and violence. And it came down to 4 states, Oregon, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. Again, 4 states, Oregon, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. And the next section, I'll go through each state as to what happened, why the corruption, and why they had 2 sets of electors, one Republican, one Democrat, because the whole thing was the Electoral College as to who won the election, the Democrat or Republicans. This was 12 years after, if you watch my other program, Voter Fraud in 1864, it was the first time we had military voting by mail, absentee voting for our military, for the 1 million Union soldiers during the Civil War. And in that case, we found it was the state of New York, which is so fraudulent, who were caught. It happened in other places, but in New York, the evidence was so hard, and it went to a military court because they were taking their soldiers and voting for them, or what they call checker play. The soldiers would vote, and they were switching the votes in the signatures, and they had an assembly line there where they were taking the votes and writing in other names there, changing the votes, voting for soldiers who were in the hospital who were so badly injured they were incoherent, but they were being voted for. Soldiers who were dead, and the names of soldiers who never even existed. That was the fate of New York. So 12 years later, the election of 1870s, New York Governor Sam Tilden ran on a platform of anti-corruption, but New York Governor Sam Tilden was the nominee, Democrat nominee for president, and the GOP candidate was Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio. And the very end result was there was voter fraud everywhere, especially in the South, violence everywhere you can find it documented. It's not made up, it's true. By the way, voter intimidation, I'm going to repeat, voter intimidation was not requiring a voter ID. That is not intimidation. The voter intimidation was violence against African American males and their families. The sexual torture, the lynching, the murder of Black men because they wanted to vote Republican. In the election of 1876, there were 38 states, and the prize was you needed 185 electoral college votes to become president. Their voter suppression, their voter intimidation meant of abuse and torture, attempted murder, attempted assassinations, and assassinations of African-American men, black voters, because they knew they would vote Republican. Now, what happened on December 5th, 1876, after the election, that's when all the states come back and they present their tally sheets, if you will. Every state elects Democrat and Republican electors. And then whoever wins that state, whatever party wins, those electors go to represent you. So on December 5th of 76, the states sent their results to Washington, D.C., and to be announced by the President of the Senate. But there were 4 states that were contested. Republicans and Democrats sent their electors or their list in separate tallies for the Republican Hayes and the Democrat Tilton. Again, Hayes was from Ohio, and Tilton was the governor of New York. It threw the election to a chaos. This had not happened before at this degree. Now, back then, Republicans controlled the Senate, and this is still hard to believe that Democrats had won control of the U.S. House. It was just 10 years after the Civil War, just 10 years after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but the Democrats controlled the House. But with these 4 states, Oregon, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida in contention, with different lists, either Republican and Democrat, who would be the electors, they had to set up a special electoral commission, election commission of 15 people, 5 members of the Supreme Court, 5 members of the House, controlled by Democrats, and 5 members of the Senate, controlled by Republicans. A 15-member board or committee, and of course, the violations are so severe, it was felt it could be an easy decision. But I will tell you right now, I'm looking carefully, every decision, no matter how egregious, no matter how much violence, no matter how many murders there were involved, was usually 8 to 7 straight party lines. Of the 15 people, the 5 Supreme Court judges, 5 senators, and 5 members of the House, the political flavor was 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats, and that's the way the vote went. So the sum total, there were 20 electoral votes available, 4 states, and Oregon had 3, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. You needed a number of 185 to be president back then. 38 states, you needed 185 electoral college votes. I don't want to make some of y'all sleepy. This is complicated, but you need 185. And basically, the Democrat Tilden already had 184. So he needed just one more to be president. The Republican Hayes had 165. So there are 20 electoral votes available. So the Democrat needed just one more. The Republican needed all 20. And that sounds like, quite a task. But again, the voter fraud, the voter intimidation, the violence was so bad, they thought maybe it'd be an easy decision. So again, he needed 185 to win. The Democrat already had 184. The Republican had 165. There were 20 votes up, and the Democrats just needed one more vote to win. Republicans needed 20. First state up was Oregon. Oregon was not a southern slave state, right? But Oregon was won by the Republican. It had 3 electoral college votes. It was won by the Republican Hayes, so he would have 3 votes, right? Well, what happened? Oregon had a Democrat governor, and the Democrat governor suddenly declared one of the Republican electors ineligible. And then he appointed a Democrat to take its place. They had 3 votes. He kept 2, but replaced 1 with a Democrat. How many votes did the Democrat need to become president? Just 1 more. So that was the first case about to this 15-member electoral commission. And it's pretty simple. I mean, it was obvious the Republican won the state, and they got all 3 electoral college votes, period. Didn't matter what shenanigans the governor of Oregon was doing back then. So that was the first decision. However, I look at my studies, and it appears even that decision was very simple, and the vote was still party lines, along party lines. It was 8 to 7 of the 15-person committee saying no. Those 3 votes, Hayes won that state. No dispute about that. He won it. All 3 electoral college votes go to Hayes. Let's talk about South Carolina. South Carolina was rare. It was a majority black populated state. The majority was a black population. So things were different. But there were armed white men we call rifle clubs. They called them red shirts. They're dressed in red shirts with rifle clubs, and they harassed the Republicans. The red shirts actually killed 6 black men in Hamburg. It's called the Hamburg Massacre. They killed 6 black men because they wanted to vote Republican. And they were backed by a Confederate general, and they actually threatened to assassinate the Republican governor, Chamberlain, of South Carolina. That's how bad South Carolina was. On election day in South Carolina, a town called Edgefield, there were 300 armed red shirts with horses. And they packed the horses side by side so the African American voter could not go and cast a ballot. They put them so close together, you literally had to go under the bellies of the horses if you wanted to go cast a Republican vote. Again, these riflemen were wearing red shirts, and the red shirts were known for their violence and for the murder. Again, the Hamburg Massacre, where 6 African-American men were murdered because they wanted to vote Republican. In another county called Barnwell County, again, there were riflemen wearing red shirts who were threatening the voters. With this voter suppression, even with the violence and the murder of black men, you can imagine a lot of black men did not vote because of the violence. And yet somehow, and this is a black majority population state, okay, the violence was targeting black male voters. Somehow the official turnout of South Carolina, you ready for that, was 101% of eligible voters. Hello. 101% of the voters voted knowing that the suppression, the attacks, the murders of African-American men, and still got 101%. It's called ballot stuffing, folks. Massive ballot stuffing all throughout the South. I'm going to move on to Louisiana and Florida, the next 2 states before this commission. But I want to stress to you what I'm going to describe happened throughout what was called the solid Democrat South. In that time period, there were mass murders, attempted assassinations, lynchings, assaults, physical assaults on you, your family, and torture. And it wasn't just in South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, but again, South Carolina had a Republican governor so they could report this, as they did in Louisiana and Florida. It happened everywhere. But these last 3 states, it was so egregious, and I guess much easier to prove this. And the evidence is rock solid. And I want to stress again, you'll find cases that are easy to look up. You'll find mass murders of 130 people, 13 people, 6. You'll find all over. And they made it clear that they targeted not just the black Republicans, but the whites who were supporting them. Look at the research. They had groups met together, black Republicans, and they had whites who were supporting them, showing them how to vote, how to read a ballot, how to register to vote. And those whites were also targeted. In fact, up to the election of 1876, just that short time period when they won the right to vote, those few years into 1876, up to that election, there were over 2,000 documented mass lynchings, assaults of black Republicans. Again, in that short time period when they finally had the right to vote, and not just African-American males, women didn't have the right to vote then, into 1876, those few years, there were over 2,000 documented mass lynchings and assaults of black Republicans. And I got to tell you, that's considered to be a very conservative number because people were so much in fear, they would not even report. Imagine how bad it was. You wouldn't report someone who was lynched or murdered, or you wouldn't report someone who was assaulted, or your home burned down, your business burned down. Again, those 2,000 is considered to be a very conservative number. Oh, Mr. Mercer, but how do you know that they were all going to vote Republican? Well, how do you know they were all going to vote Republican? The Republicans passed a trilogy of Civil War amendments, 13, 14, 15, and these new African-American male voters, yes, voted 100% Republican. Again, the voter fraud was widespread throughout the South, but these states in particular, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, it was so obvious. These are the last ones of contention, and it was thought to be so easy to prove. The Democrats also used in the voting what were called repeaters. You've heard this before. Maybe not that term. Repeaters are voters you voted, and then you voted again, and then you went to another location, another city, another county, and you voted again. These repeaters were used all throughout the South. That's why earlier I showed you in South Carolina where even though they put fear in the African-American voter, suppressed the vote, they still had 101% of all votes because they used repeaters. And also took advantage of the fact that many of the new black voters were illiterate, could not read and write. Remember in the Old South, the Democrats made it illegal to teach your slaves how to read and write. So they had ballots, and the ballots usually had a symbol. At least you know you're given a ballot by party. You walked in, I want a Republican ballot. I want a Democrat ballot. Isn't like it is today. You want a ballot by that sheet, made it clear you're voting by that party. And they had the symbols that you knew was Republican, Democrat. Like today we have the donkey and the elephant. They had symbols there, but some of these new black voters were illiterate, and they gave them ballots that were a Republican ballot, but the names inside were all, guess what, Democrat. So the fraudulent ballots, the repeaters, and the violence was all throughout the solid Democrat South. Here's what was happening. So this committee went and voted, and after all the evidence is in there, it was pretty clear, and all 20 electoral college votes went to the Republican, who now had 185, and he was announced the winner. And then things got real bad. There were rumors that the Democrats were going to have a filibuster in the House where they actually approved the final votes, and they were going to send a mob to the Capitol. They still would not approve the vote. And there was a meeting. It was nearly 4 months after the election, 2 days before Inauguration Day. Suddenly, this meeting happened. It was about 4:10 in the morning. They finally announced that the winner, they being the U.S. House, the winner would be Hayes, and he would be the president of the United States by electoral college victory of 185 to 184. Now, what happened at 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:10 in the morning, in a bar, when suddenly they agreed there were concessions made? It's known as the Great Compromise of 1877. As a matter of fact, the current president, Ulysses S. Grant, actually had a secret swearing-in ceremony for Republican President Hayes because the promise, the threats of assassination from Democrats. Again, they were going to assassinate him, I guess like what happened to Abraham Lincoln when he was elected president. So they had a secret inauguration swearing in. Now, I'm going to flip back. I'm going to go back in the future real quick just to share something was 30 years later in the floor of the U.S. Senate. One of the Southern Democrats who was one of the leaders of the red shirts. Remember the red shirts who had the horses side by side? They couldn't get in there, who were beating up people and murdering people in Hamburg, South Carolina. Well, a senator from South Carolina. His name was Benjamin Pitchfork Ben. They call him Pitchfork Ben. Senator Benjamin Tillman, again, a leader of the red shirts, he actually, on the floor of the United States Senate 30 years later, was talking about what they had done. Hang on to your seats. This is going to make you angry. He said, on the floor of the United States Senate, he said the election of 1876, we set up the Democrat Party with one plank only. This was white man's country, and the white men must govern it. On the floor of the U.S. Senate, he boasted about what had happened when he was the leader of the red shirts, that the violence and the murder of African-American men who wanted to vote Republican. He said we had only one plank in our Democrat Party. This is white man's country, and white men must govern. But guess what? He didn't stop there. No, Tillman of South Carolina, under that banner, we went to battle. It was then that we shot them. It was then that we killed them. It was then that we stuffed the ballot boxes. because this disease needed a strong remedy. So if you doubt anything I said, here's a Democrat senator from South Carolina on the floor of the U.S. Senate who was boasting, and he admitted they shot people, they killed people, they stuffed ballot boxes. He admitted all those things 30 years later. No doubt whatsoever as to what had happened. But what did happen, though? Well, it was the compromise of 1877. Republican Hayes would only run one term, only serve one term. But to be for the House, controlled by the Democrats, to allow him to be president, he had to promise to remove all the Union troops in the South. Remember, the Union troops are in the South to implement them for the safety of African Americans, to make sure there was no slavery, no involuntary servitude, that you had your civil rights, and the black men were allowed to vote. Well, the troops were there to secure that, or to protect the African-American male voters and their families. But as part of the agreement, the Democrats said, we'll make you president only if you promise to immediately remove those troops, which he did. He did remove the troops, and the result of history was the influx of the rise again, the power of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, the rise of the Southern Democrats who put in their Jim Crow laws. I always laugh when I hear Democrats accuse Republicans of a poll tax or a Jim Crow law or voter suppression, because no, those are all devices of the Democrat Party. And what they established and what they wanted was a solid Democrat South. And that's what happened. For the next 100 years, it was a solid Democrat, one-party South. And I tell you, whenever there's only one party in charge for a long time, that's very dangerous. Reconstruction ended when the truth left. So for the next 100 years, I'm going to submit to you this: every child in America, every school child in America knew two things. With the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and the ending of Reconstruction, for the next 100 years, every child, every school child in America knew two things. This is what they believed. Number one, Republicans were the party of freedom and the Emancipation Proclamation. Two, the Democrats were the party of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. So there you go, my friends. There's the election of 1876. Let me add one more thing about the media at that time. Yeah, I'm going to attack the media. When Hayes became president, Republican Hayes, the Democrat newspapers protested. They said they were cheated. And they called him your fraudulency. Your fraudulency. They were upset because Hayes had won. They were there through all these debates. They saw the evidence, the overwhelming evidence of not just voter fraud, but the evidence toward African-American voters and their families and their children. They are aware of that. The newspapers saw it firsthand. They knew what had happened, and they still sided with those Democrat states who were guilty of the violence, the lynching, and murder of African-American men simply because they wanted to vote Republican. My friends, this session was tough, I know, but it's a piece of history that's been erased. It's been deleted. Why? We can learn from this. But it's been erased and deleted, and guess what? It's also been revised and been rewritten. When I'm in debates and people accuse my Republican friends of being Jim Crow, poll tax, voter suppression, even Ku Klux Klan, that's just bad history. That's not true at all. That's not at all what happened. But I hope today's session was useful. We can learn from our past, we can stop mistakes, and we can see evil and maybe start calling things evil. I hope you enjoyed today's session. As always, please hit the like and subscribe button. It's the only way we can tell our sponsors that Mercer Moments in American History is making a difference. This is the only way we can grow and keep on going. We already have scheduled for the spring of next year. We want a special on the original 13th Amendment, on the actual 13th Amendment, the 14th, the 15th, on the Ku Klux Klan law, the Dred Scott decision, We have some great historical perspectives of things actually happened in history. It should be in your history books, but things might have been rewritten, revised. And I promise you, only go by facts. Only present facts. Today's shout-out was the University of Colorado, actually the state of Colorado. Always please pray for all those high school and college students, the young men and women who love America, who love a free market, free enterprise system, who love our Constitution, especially in today's political environment in our colleges and universities. They need your encouragement. They need our prayers. And finally, I always remember the people of the Great Awakening, what they went through. And let's be honest, those are mostly white people who were trying to help their black brothers and sisters. White people of the Great Awakening trying to help their black brothers and sisters and what they sacrificed and what they accomplished. See, the strength of America, it's been our faith and our values. And I've told you before, there's many times, like there in 1876, we could have gone the wrong way, the wrong path. And it took some brave people to find us, bring us back together. And I suggest as people of faith and values who had to fight a lot, had to come back and make our nation point in the right direction. And finally, I always end with, I believe, the power of America, which made us so strong, which makes us oftentimes invincible, is simply that in God we still trust. I'm going to end with that, my friends. Right here in America, in God, we still trust. Thank you. God bless you.